A trip to Yellowstone seemed like a great idea. Summer was in full swing, and our group, me, Josh, Emily, and Mike, had longed to get out of the city. Yellowstone beckoned us with its wilderness and the promise of complete freedom away from civilization. But we had no idea what awaited us in the depths of this ancient reserve. We set up our camp far from the hiking trails. There was a faint smell of pine trees and fresh leaves in the air, mingling with the aroma of sausages roasting on the fire. The first few hours were filled with laughter and conversation. We talked about our upcoming hike to the geysers, how cool it was to get away from the hustle and bustle of the city, and how wonderful it would be for us to be here. But around midnight, something changed. Everyone felt it. It was as if the air around us had gotten denser, pressing down on our chests, and the silence of the night had turned into a viscous substance from which it was impossible to escape. Josh was the first to become alert. He stood up abruptly, peering intently into the dark forest beyond the boundary of the campfire-lit circle.
"Do you hear that?"
He asked quietly, not taking his eyes off the blackness. We froze. At first, I didn't realize what he was talking about. All I could hear was the crackling of the fire and the rustling of the wind in the trees. But then I caught it, a faint whisper. It seemed to be coming from all directions, creeping through the trees, and it seemed like it wasn't just people whispering, but the forest itself.
"Probably the wind."
Mike brushed it off, but his voice trembled. Emily, who was sitting next to me, grabbed my hand. I felt her tense up, like she was ready to break free and run. But there was nowhere to run. The whispering was getting worse. I couldn't make out any of the words, but the feeling that they were meant for us was unbearable. We all tried to pretend that nothing was happening and continued to sit by the fire, but it soon became clear that we could not stand it. Something had to be done.
Maybe it's some animals.
Emily suggested uncertainly, looking around, but everyone knew it wasn't. The wind could have brought any sound, but this whispering was too purposeful. We decided to put out the fire and go to bed. All attempts to explain what was happening seemed foolish, and each of us wanted to believe that in the morning it would all seem just a stupid fear. But sleep didn't come. That night I lay in the tent, feeling every rustle, every movement of the wind, making my heart beat harder. But nothing could prepare us for what happened next. Suddenly there was a scream, unbearably loud, as if squeezed by terror and pain. I recognized the voice. It was Mike. Emily and I jumped out of the tent. The fire was almost out and the forest was in thick darkness. But the screaming didn't stop. On the contrary, it grew more and more desperate. We rushed toward Mike's tent, but when we reached it, he wasn't there. Only his sleeping bag was tattered, and the ground around him was covered with strange marks, as if something had dragged him away.
"Josh!"
Emily called out, and he too appeared from his tent, pale and looking around wildly.
"What was that?"
He asked hoarsely. I didn't know what to answer. The three of us stood at the edge of the woods, feeling the fear gripping us ever more tightly. Somewhere in the distance we heard the whispering again, but this time it was louder. And suddenly, movement. In the darkness between the trees, something flashed. It wasn't just a shadow or an animal. It was a human-like creature, but its outline was blurred, as if it was made up of darkness itself. The creature stopped and stared at us. Emily shrieked and jerked back. Josh pulled out a flashlight and, with trembling hands, pointed the beam toward the woods. But the creature was gone, as suddenly as it had appeared.
"We need to leave."
Josh whispered, looking me straight in the eye. The whispering was suddenly deafening, as if hundreds of voices were speaking simultaneously right in our ears. And before we could move, the ground beneath our feet shook. The branches of the trees around us stirred, and shadows slipped out of the darkness. Long, shapeless figures moving like smoke.
"Run!"
Josh shouted, but his voice was drowned in that strange hum. The three of us ran on, not seeing the road, not looking back. The forest that had seemed peaceful and welcoming during the day was now full of shadows, ominous sounds, and something else we couldn't explain. I could hear Emily sobbing somewhere behind me, Josh breathing hoarsely beside me. Every step was agonizing, but we couldn't stop, not after what had happened to Mike. The forest around us seemed to come alive. Tree branches reached out like hands, scraping against our clothes. The whispering didn't stop. It grew louder and louder, turning into some ominous chorus of voices that seemed to be laughing at us, anticipating our doom.
We need to get to the road.
Josh shouted, his voice sounding delirious. But there was no road. We went deeper and deeper, wandering through this diabolical maze, until suddenly we heard it again, a scream. But this time it wasn't Mike. Emily stopped, gasping, her eyes full of terror.
It's Josh.
She whispered, but before she could finish, her gaze froze. I looked back. Josh was gone. Just now he'd been there, but now he was gone. The ground beneath his feet looked like someone had ripped him right out of this world, as if he'd never existed. I grabbed Emily's hand and dragged her behind me. We ran for a while longer until we came to a small clearing surrounded by tall trees. The whispers died down. The forest stood still, as if watching us.
What is it? What is it?
Emily cried, sobbing and looking around. But I didn't know the answer. All I knew was that something ancient and malevolent was hunting us. And then I saw them. The shadows. They stood at the edge of the clearing, staring at us. There were no faces, no eyes, just shapeless silhouettes that billowed like smoke. But their presence made my blood run cold. I couldn't move. All I could do was stand there and watch them come closer. Emily screamed, but the sound of her voice was as if blown away with the wind. The shadows surrounded her before I could do anything. She was gone, just vanished into that ominous gloom, leaving me alone. I felt fear gripping my entire body. These creatures, whatever they were taking my friends one by one, and now they were coming towards me. I don't remember how I ended up on the ground. The only thing that remained in my memory were faces, or something that could have been faces. They were leaning over me, whispering something, and I could feel my mind slowly fading away. It felt like I was dying. I don't know how much time passed, maybe hours, maybe days. When I woke up, the shadows were gone. I was lying in a clearing, weakened and exhausted. Josh, Emily, Mike, they were all gone. They were nowhere to be found. All that was left was me and the emptiness. I returned to the campground the next day. I didn't have the energy or the will to go any further. The campfire had long since gone out, the tents were ruined, and footprints on the ground were the only reminders of my friends. I was alone. It happened many years ago, but I still can't forget those events. No one believed my words. No one believed that the forest in Yellowstone could come alive and take the lives of my friends. I tried to find an explanation, studied the history of the place, and this is what I learned. Ancient Native American legends say that these forests are home to creatures they called shadows of the forest. They come at night when a man is alone and take his soul. Those who see them do not return. It's been 20 years since it happened. I still can't get rid of the memories, and now, today, I'm back in Yellowstone again. I know it's crazy, but I have to find answers. I have to understand what it was. Something inside me says the forest is calling me back. I can't resist that call. If anyone ever finds this journal, know that the forest is alive, and it wants us. Don't go where the trail ends. Don't go into the darkness. The shadows are watching. The entry is cut off.